All right, so.
Wait. Set.
All right, so who wants to talk about it?
Manya, you want to start us off?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I've been tasked with this, and this API proposal comes from Steven's prototype, and the motivation is that Azure SDK already exposes synchronous API, and underneath they do sync over async, and they want us to support full sync HTTP client methods. So we added this with only for HTTP 1, not for HTTP 2, because that would be much more problematic. And the proposed API lists all the necessary changes we need to do in order to support this scenario. That's it.
Yeah, probably we should look at the API as proposed, right?
Yeah, who's...
Yeah, because I don't see it, you know. So on the client, there's send, synchronous send, and overload of HTTP message invoker, synchronous send. Then the message handler has also synchronous send, and all the implementations on our side has the synchronous send implementation, and also HTTP content down. There's also HTTP content on which we added synchronous send and overloads on all our implementations.
So
these types already exist, right? Is that fair? So
Come again?
These types all exist, right? It's all,
Yeah. We're not adding new
Yeah.
types.
Yeah.
So
Just-
any reason the cancellation tokens are not optional? Is that kind of
Aren't they?
Yeah.
Scroll to the... Oh.
intentional, or it's
Seems like
We made it
Oversight.
defaulted there. Maybe we just didn't fill it in on the other ones.
Are the existing async methods optional on the invoker?
No.
Okay. So that,
We mimicked for all of them.
yeah, so there's consistency with the existing async method then on the base class. I mean, we could always make everything
not
optional.
really. I don't think it's. What do you mean by consistent?
So the existing send async method does not have an optional cancellation token. It has to be specified.
Oh.
Yeah, these ones here already exist, right? So these
Yeah.
ones are the new ones.
So a lot of the time, when you have a sync API, there is no cancellation. Depending on someone's application model, it may just not fit. I think it makes sense to default it if we have it.
So
Yeah.
does this public virtual actually do or default values work on public virtual as well?
Yeah.
They do, right?
It's whatever call set you're binding to is the one is
Yeah.
the default that gets selected.
I think Jeremy had a long discussion with Jared on which ones picked when, and it was kind of a PhD in overload resolution, but I think it largely depends on what call set it is, but which one it is, it's not obvious to the user necessarily,
Yeah.
right?
If you have a local typed as HTTP client, the overridden method will get bound to.
Right.
If you have a local typed as HTTP message invoker, the base method gets bound to. Like,
I mean, in general, when the default is literally default, it seems unproblematic to spread it all over, though. Like,
yeah.
What really sucks is when there's magic ranges involved.
Mm-hmm.
I actually now noticed that, for example, in HTTP client, the second cancellation token, the second overload, it cannot have default cancellation token,
Yeah.
because then it would be ambiguous with the longer overload.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, but if you make the first one default, why would you need the second one at all?
Yeah, so we could change it such that the first overload, the cancellation token, is not, basically nothing is optional, and then the second one, cancellation token, is optional. So it would be like if you just have a request, you call the second one with defaulted cancellation token.
In
If
fact-
you have request and cancellation token, you call the second overload passing the cancellation token. And if you have all three parameters, you have to call the first overload.
In fact, if we have this
So I
one
have-
here optional, why do we have this overload at all?
The completion options are a feature of HTTP client, not any of the underlying invoker stuff.
No, I get that, but if you call this method, you're passing a request and you're passing in a cancellation token.
So, Imo, I
it
would
will,
say
it will call this one here.
yeah,
Yes.
I would say the reason is that people don't understand default parameters. We are seeing this literally, like in, I would say, 80% of user.
No, that's fair, but then I would say then don't make it default.
Oh, the longer overload, correct? Like the.
Like this default here will never apply. Because if you omit this parameter, this method will be called.
You have to add a default cancellation.
No, I mean it doesn't. Oh, I guess this one is defaulted here. I see. So if you only pass a request, we call this one, and if you pass a request and a cancellation token, we call this one.
Yeah.
Seems odd.
Yeah, I kind of agree that the second one, if we default the cancellation token and make the completion option not default, is a little better.
Yeah.
So why do we
Not
like?
just-
Why can't we just
wait,
reconcile them?
Steven was trying to say
I was
something.
gonna say, why wouldn't we just mirror, keep it simple and mirror the exact structure of the existing async methods?
We could too.
Certainly could.
So I think the argument is that this is mimicking exactly what we have in async APIs.
Actually, to torpedo this whole
Yeah,
That's fine. Just
I know.
remember you're live on the internet, so,
So
only say
I
thank
am?
you.
We are
Yes.
going to lunch after this review, and I buy lunch to people who don't torpedo.
Yeah, I agree with
Okay,
Steve. Just mirror
David is out.
exactly- Just mirror exactly what's already there.
Wasn't the reasoning because this is synchronous that you probably more than likely don't have a cancellation token, so you're always going to be passing in default for the cancellation
Well,
token?
if you're doing this as part of like a client UI application, like you could have a cancel button hooked up to the cancellation token, right?
No,
Like,
no, you
presumably you'd be doing
could.
an async anyway, but whatever.
You totally could have a cancellation token, but it's the majority of the time you probably don't.
But Eric, I have a question. What are you pushing for against, like the existing async methods? You don't need a cancellation token.
Oh, you mean explode out?
I'm saying have four overloads of send, just like we have 4 overloads of send async.
Ah, okay, got it. Yep, I'm fine with that.
I gotta ask, why is there a token there? Since it's on topic.
Well, we were discussing, like, look at the HTTP client synchronous send methods. The shorter overload requires you to pass cancellation token. The longer one doesn't, and it's a bit weird. It's kind of you would think that it should be backwards, but Steve's argument is that it actually mimics how the async APIs are designed. So I guess that's a good argument. Just keep it the same.
David, was your question? Why is there a cancellation token
don't.
at all? If
At
you have a
all.
Send overload?
Is it because you're
Yeah.
gonna pull it, or because you're gonna use the way handle, or because you're gonna like?
That's our implementation of timeouts.
Okay.
We don't have to expose extra timeout properties and things.
Per request, per call.
The problem is HTTP client already exposes HTTP client.timeout and HTTP client.cancel all pending, whatever that method is.
Request, yeah.
HTTP client is entirely separate from the underlying implementation, and so it implements that by passing down a cancellation token. And so for those to work with send basically has to have a cancellation token as well. Plus, Christoph has expressed concerns for Azure scenarios around being able to cancel even synchronous methods.
Yeah, we definitely need it. We run into massive problems with many APIs, synchronous APIs, not having ability to cancel.
Yeah.
Even some async APIs don't let us cancel. And then what happens when the request gets stuck, we cannot do retries. So Pavel has been fixing, actually yesterday, lots of code because we wanted retries to work when we read streams. And stream read async on .NET Framework, cancellation token actually doesn't cancel anything. Do you guys know about that?
Yeah.
What?
It's
Well,
cooperative.
wait, hold on. That's not true. For some implementations of Stream, that is true.
Oh, okay. Well, the one that we get from HTTP client.
That may very well be the case. I mean, the base implementation of stream.readAsync basically does an upfront check, and then it just delegates to the existing begin-end methods, which have no concept of cancellation. So it requires the derived stream to have overridden it, which on .NET Core, all the built-in types do. And the last of the stragglers was, I think, network stream, and it does as of .NET Core 3.0. But yeah, on .NET Framework, I'm sure there are a bunch that just don't override it.
Yeah, and basically it causes us to we issue a request, we never get any response, and after like 3 minutes it times out, and therefore our retries, and we retry 3 times, and then it's 9 minutes per call to
That's
us.
pretty good. You can't retry though, right? Safely. If you don't have, if you can't cancel the actual operation, you can't really retry. Can you?
We can.
You're making the
The
request.
connection gets
I
closed,
see.
and
Well, just this isn't really relevant, but why would you try to cancel if it times out? I mean,
because we want to time out sooner.
If you request cancellation and it doesn't, and it takes 3 minutes, why would you try again? Because you already canceled it.
No, because what we want to do is we don't want to wait 3 minutes.
Right. You wouldn't. I get that part, but you wouldn't actually take 9 minutes.
Well, we call the sync API with a cancellation token that is hooked up to a timer, and we want to cancel it after 100 seconds, which is the SLA for this service.
Yeah, no, I totally get that part. But I was questioning the part where you said you would try 3 times, and I'm curious why you would do the second and third retry if you'd already issued cancellation.
Oh, because many requests get stuck temporarily. So first time we issue a request, it gets stuck, but second one it doesn't. It actually does work. It's when the basically load balancer moves the service to some other node.
Happens in Cosmos too.
Yeah.
Kind of weird.
Anyway, that's a bit of a digression, but it kind of, I meant to say, it illustrates like why we need cancellation tokens in sync APIs.
I can see it making sense if you're gonna do sync over async and call the async APIs to do timeouts. I'm wondering about the implementation of like using tokens synchronously.
But why do you worry? It's actually
Just thinking about how it would work. Like none of the APIs you're calling actually support like you call socket.send.
No, it
Can't
doesn't.
cancel.
No,
Can't
of course
cancel
you
that.
can. Of course.
Yeah, well, we under the covers we will dispose the socket.
I see. You're gonna hook it up and then call dispose.
Do we have any other synchronous APIs that use cancellation token right now? Not that I can think of.
The only ones I'm aware of in the entire framework are wait methods on synchronization primitives, and some of the corresponding methods on things like blocking collection, which is essentially a synchronization primitive. So for all intents and purposes, the only place we've used them are sync primitives.
Wait, which ones besides the collections? Like, wait,
Like
handle?
semaphore slim, manual reset event slim, etc.
Oh, those have tokens on wait, not timeouts.
On wait.
Anyway, so I have another question, unless we want to still talk about cancellation token. The second question is, so on the GitHub thread, we had a discussion about kind of the dangers of these APIs. And I do think we should work on the analyzer to prevent people from, calling these APIs in an asynchronous context.
I think that's fine, but I think it's very unlikely it'll be on by default.
Why is that?
Because it's not uncommon to call these in a pattern that makes sense. Like, if you look at the implementation of this exact thing, like we have async methods that decide whether to make a synchronous or asynchronous call in the body based on a flag that's passed in. And so we will have an async method calling a sync method because we're on a synchronous code path.
That's okay though.
No,
I
the
think
other
that's
way we don't.
that's our own weirdness because of how we want to implement this. I think the question is to help users. If there's an async version of the method and they're in an async method, we should be
I understand.
like, hey,
I'm
use
saying
this
in
one.
that specific case, the analyzer would fire. It would warn to say that you're calling a sync method inside an async context. You should switch.
You should just disable the analyzer for that method, but that much rarer.
But our stance for things that are on by default in the SDK and .NET 5 is no false positives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if people get annoyed by it, they're going to turn it off project-wide.
Right, but we're talking about an analyzer specific to this send API, aren't we?
No.
Why not?
There's not. I think David and Christoph, you're talking about do not call sync from send async.
We are talking about don't call synchronous send API from a method that is an async method, meaning it has an
You're talking
async.
analyzer specific to this method rather than in general.
I think in general.
I mean, let's table this one because I
Sure.
mean, there's another discussion on the analyzer itself that we'll have at some point have. As Steven said, the goal is like minimum noise, right? Ideally 0. We probably don't get 0 in all cases, but like if we can turn it on some sample code basis and see how bad it is. But like, I agree with Steven. Like based on your Nextcloud experience, if you have too many false positives, people will just turn off the feature entirely and you lose all value.
So
I think everyone agrees. I just don't think that is very common. I think
that's something we
common
can.
for us because we're advanced
Yeah,
developers.
let's
I'm
just
not
throw
sure.
data at it. I think that's
Yeah.
that's I think probably the best way for us to measure this anyway.
We have other APIs that have sync and async right now, and we don't have an analyzer, and they're generally used okay. So
Mm-mm.
I don't think that should block.
They're not though. They're not. It's the same bug. Like we're actually gonna do this in ASP.NET Core, but we held off to do it in .NET Core proper. For this reason. Like for stream APIs, if you're in ASP.NET and you use the sync version, don't use the async version. Like that's what we want to have as a rule, right?
So I understand that it may be some investigation. Is anybody like going to actually investigate it? Like what would it mean? Write the analyzer, run it on some code basis and see like how much noise it generates. Because I do agree, like if the noise is huge, yes, I mean it would be nice, but it's not practical. But I don't know. I'm kind of with David. I don't know how real this problem would be for like for average app.
There was a separate work item tracking analyzers, but I don't see it linked in this issue. Is that the issue we would use to track those analyzers?
I just take a note. I will link it up, and I think that our goal with generally keeping noise down, we have to find a solution for that anyways.
Yeah.
And I think we have enough access to code bases that we could, sample to get a sense for how noisy something is.
We can table it. I would love it if we could have such a rule. We should absolutely have such a rule. Like it should just be there.
Yeah.
Whether it's on by default, I'm skeptical because I do think there's gonna be a lot of false positives. Even if not the example that I have, there are other examples. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying new memory stream, write, and you're inside an async method, but it's gonna fire on those.
Honestly, I'm also okay with some rules being off. I think they still add value. It's the same thing with this.
Does it need to be?
What is it? Configure await false, for example. Like you don't want everybody to do it, but the people that want to do it, you want to have an analyzer for it, and they could be.
And the
same
thing is, once the
category.
rules are created, we can figure out how to tweak them such that they're appropriate to turn on by default.
Yeah, I mean.
And can we have smart rules to understand specific APIs?
Yeah,
we can,
If it's
but
crazy.
Yeah.
Memory stream, like maybe that one's like you say that one's fine.
No, we can't. It's just bang for the buck.
Well,
like that's really what it is.
We also, it doesn't even require separate rules. Like the Roslyn analyzers now support configurations. So like some of the rules allow you to have a default, but then in the configuration file, you can basically say, if it was this one, it would say, rather than being on for all methods, I want it to be on for XYZ and foo and bar.
Yes.
And then it would, only factor in. So we can certainly play games like that if we think that would help us enable it in certain cases, and if the false positive rate was 0 for those.
Yep.
Yeah. But the analyzer is also just code. You can do whatever the fuck you want, right? Like, it's just can you do it performantly and all the other goodness.
Right.
So my other question was, there's no convenience overloads. We don't do get text, get string.
I think the longer form of the proposal had overloads for get, patch, post,
The
put.
proposal had all of them.
Yeah.
We decided we wanted to discourage using these synchronous methods for now, so we're leaving them off and we can add them on later.
I want to get byte array. I have to call it via reflection. I can't call anything that uses any types you've added in this assembly, but I can call get byte array.
Yeah.
So right now from cryptography or from X509 we have to call get byte array async, get await or get result.
Wait. For what?
When crypto needs to download quills.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's in
you
the
should
sync.
do asynchronously.
The code path is synchronous. That's a problem.
We're next 519.
I mean, I super understand that. Can we add an async version?
Nope.
Nope.
You can't?
Nope.
Windows doesn't support it.
Neither does OpenSSL, like no
Yeah.
one supports it.
Are you in a callback?
Yes. Sometimes.
So in Windows,
we
it's
need to
flat
fix
font.
that.
Why can't you call this method?
They depend on me.
Dependencies.
Oh, because in order to reflect bind to like the thing with HTTP completion, like I have to reflect load like 11 types to call any of these methods and members. But the get byte array async, which is I found the client, it takes no more arguments or other than the URL and returns a byte array. I can call that one.
So hold on.
That one works wonderfully.
There's code in crypto.
Yes.
That from a callback, being called either from Windows
Yep.
or OpenSSL. You're in a callback, do something.
And you make an HTTP
You
request.
somehow create an HTTP client
Yes. Yep.
and make a request.
Yeah.
That does not sound good.
That's how curls work.
Yeah. If you said you wanted revocation checking and we have to download it, we have to download it.
Yep. That's how curls work.
99% of the time it's
that
cached.
should be designed. Okay.
That ship sailed like
Yes.
decades ago.
You might be right.
Because
but, like,
on Windows we have asynchronous.
Anyway, we're getting off track.
It sometimes downloads.
Yeah, we're going off track here though.
Anyway.
that's horrific.
The
They should say 10 years ago and we don't know whether it's still done.
That's the perfect example of like existing call stacks that are synchronous that we
Yeah.
just have no choice but to do the best we possibly
Yeah.
can.
For HTTP client, for the synchronous send API, you're leaving it, so it's virtual on the invoker, it's overwritten on the client, but it's not sealed on the client. Do you anticipate somebody might provide another implementation of it by subclassing HTTP client? You're not just going to like task.run the async version?
No, we have an actual synchronous version.
You call into the synchronous OS APIs?
In what case?
Yeah. Or HTTP 1.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Did anybody cover how this is gonna work or break on HTTP2? Because there's no possibility of a sync code path there.
Well, yeah, it'll be sync over async, and the question is how good can we make it? Right now, worst possible case, every request requires basically 2 threads. We can get it down to be n+1 with a little work, but I don't think we can ever make it n.
Okay.
So I gotta ask, is this going to be in Net Standard or just Net Core 5?
Aren't those the same thing?
We can't retroactively edit the already released net standard versions.
Yeah, and that's it for a reason. So like, when you use it, how are you gonna use this API? 5 only?
So we're gonna do a sync over async in everything and then light up on that with
In
5.
5.
Well, presumably, Christoph, you're going to do synchronous on .NET Framework as well, right?
On .NET Framework, we're gonna do exactly sync over async, yes.
Why?
No, synchronous.
Wait. I thought that if this is so important, why wouldn't you do synchronous on .NET Framework?
Are we gonna have these APIs, synchronous APIs in .NET Framework?
You already have
Is there
web request.
web request?
Well, we would have to switch to web request as a
yeah.
transport. We could.
Is that going to require contorting your code?
No,
Okay.
it can be done. We would definitely consider that. I was under the impression that we would trade one set of problems for another set of problems, but maybe it's not the case.
It should be fine.
I don't think it's the case. On .NET Framework, HTTP client is built on top of HTTP web request, so there's nothing that you can do
I see.
in HTTP client that you can't do in HTTP web request.
Okay.
The only,
Yeah,
question would
definitely.
be, the only question would be if you expose delegating handlers to consumers, then you'd have to somehow figure out that.
We don't expose that.
Okay. Easy. Have your own pipeline.
Yes, we expect it. Literally, this is the reason why we have. This is not the only reason, but one of the main reasons.
So what other questions do we have?
Oh gosh, this feels so bad. I'm trying to think of something decent I could say that's not really terrible.
And again, what would so for the base class, what would the default implementation of send be?
Sync over async.
Okay. And then HTTP client will override it, do something more efficient if possible, and if not, fall back to sync over async. For instance, in
Basically,
HTTP.
all
Okay.
of the built-in handlers that we have
Got it.
will quote quote do the right thing.
Okay.
The moment you insert a third-party handler or someone who's targeting net standard or whatever, it's going to force the whole pipeline to end up being, it's going to hit that point and it's going to become blocking waiting on an async operation.
But we still expect it to work though. It sounds
It'll work,
suboptimal.
but you'll have the exact same scalability bottleneck that exists today, which is either scalability or temporary deadlock, depending on your environment. Yeah, we're walking an interesting line here, which is those of us pushing for this don't necessarily want it, but believe it's a necessary evil.
Are there any potential problems that might crop up from calling send on thread A and calling virtual methods on HTTP request message from thread B? I guess if you're calling send async, that might already be the case anyway. So
yeah, I mean, the objects involved here aren't thread safe, regardless of whether you're calling the async or sync methods.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, like, is there a scenario where someone could be using thread local storage for this? But that's probably off the wall bonkers at that point. Okay.
I mean, where's the diagnostic handler? Is that there too?
That's internal.
I see. But it will.
But that would fall into the category of one of the several implementations we need to do the right thing on. So we'll have to override these methods and whatnot. And every content type and whatever else is in this pipeline, we have to override it on.
Where's the content?
And this is going to touch a lot of the stack.
Down below.
And it's not going to be pretty.
Can you scroll down?
I mean, it's what's shown here.
Well, no, these are the built-in types.
Oh, you mean in ASP.NET, for example?
Yeah, there's plenty of other types that have derived from HTTP content or delegating handler or anything else, and everybody has to react to this. If
they don't,
they're gonna make the problem worse, not better.
Well, I don't know they'll make it worse, but they certainly won't make it better.
It'll be the same, right?
I thought ASP.NET didn't allow sync over async.
In the request and response bodies.
Okay.
But even if they kind of don't have a choice in this case, and that is, if ASP.NET is doing everything asynchronous, which they are, and then we come along and someone calls the sync method and ASP.NET hasn't overridden every serialized to stream method on all the content types, and one of those is used on a post, then it's going to hit that path and it's going to do sync over async, which may or may not be an issue depending on how much content is being sent and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, but I guess the counter argument to that is the caller would have do something async dot get await or get result anyway, or probably just call the dot result property straight up.
No, because before you didn't have a choice but to use async APIs. Now you have a choice.
Right. So this becomes worse if someone previously had a reasonable option of using async and not blocking, and now they choose to use the synchronous method. Now it's potentially worse than it could have otherwise been. If they didn't have a choice and they were blocking themselves, it's no worse.
Right, and I guess my argument was that's the counter. Like, if that's already the state people find themselves in, this doesn't seem any worse.
Much worse.
Well, I think that if you get a task, most people will question, what should I do with this? Whereas someone might be typing send in IntelliSense and just go to the send instead of the send async.
Yeah, but we had already discussed ways to work around that, either through an analyzer or hiding it in IntelliSense until you actually use it, something like that.
And besides, we already have many synchronous APIs. Like, we cannot prevent people from writing, bad code. They can get this. They can get the stream from the first, response, and then start reading it synchronously. Like, what are we gonna do with it?
Yeah.
Is that something we can do in Analyzer realistically?
I think IntelliSense would be great if it realized you were in an async context and showed you the async methods first in the preview.
And that one also we can definitely do.
Yeah, we've had conversations related to that with other methods for IntelliSense, basically saying, right now we have a way of saying editor browsable never, which says it never shows up in IntelliSense, but that's kind of a pain to use because maybe I really do want to use that method. So another thing that we had played around with was maybe it's hidden in IntelliSense until the first time you use it in a project, and then at that point it shows up, or something like that.
Or
there are
like
ways.
Sounds like a very good suggestion to the folks working on IntelliCode.
Yeah.
But I think we would want to accept this API based on the assumption that none of that will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, we just have to realize, like, the API is part of the ecosystem, and the ecosystem as a whole, to be healthy, requires more than just this API. It also requires guardrails.
Yeah.
And the guardrails are provided by not us.
But is that something that an analyzer could tell you that you're not overriding all the methods? Like basically people in ASP.NET, can we tell them that there's something that they probably should do, and can we detect those cases?
It's like stream, right? You add new stream overloads, it's the same problem.
I mean, you could always have an analyzer for that. It's just whether ASP.NET would want to turn it on is up to them.
It's by default.
I can't imagine we would ever turn such an analyzer on by default.
So ASP.NET has not directly used this object model since Web API 2 and the Web API 2 compat shims. It's only used for outbound requests, and you're directly using HTTP client there. You're not generally implementing delegating handlers and overriding stuff.
I see.
But
implementing, but you know, at that point you're just a customer of HTTP client, and you
right, it's not very ASP.NET specific, except that if you use the sync code path, you're going to wreck your server.
Right.
Sure.
No more so than if you were doing sync over async, though.
Similarly, yes.
But to Chris's point, like Manya's change, covers .NET runtime. It doesn't cover the ecosystem of folks that have derived from HTTP content, or derived from HTTP message invoker, or derived from whatever other types are involved here. There's a long tail here. Part of this work needs to be addressing that long tail.
Yeah, and I guess that's my question. Like, how do we communicate that? Like, we can work with first parties clearly, but like third parties is like we can write a blog post, but
you
that
can
also
tell
doesn't.
people like that this is a bad thing, but please override these methods because like
no, it's
just in
basically
case someone wants to call.
There is I didn't take this path in my prototype, but there is the other option of the base implementations all simply throw an exception.
Then we'd probably want a can write sync method and.
Yeah, well, I guess that depends on, does it really not work, generally speaking, when somebody doesn't do the right thing, or does it work but not as performant?
It works until it can't scale. Like it's one of those things where like you can make it work, like sync over async, but then you get that bug. Someone says Azure storage is broken because they're doing sync over async deep in the library, and I only found this on my servers after it got hit by load, like on day 7.
I mean, I would say to me, scale is less of a concern, I guess, because first of all, like that's a much smaller set of people usually that actually need that scale, and then the other argument is like you will hopefully have some sort of perf measurement, so if you care about scale, and then you would find
the issue is library authors. People trust libraries to do the right thing, and then like apps get tainted because libraries do bad things.
But this library that does something bad is not worse than us not having this feature. People still call sync over async APIs.
Agreed.
So like, if whether the library is not, is not overriding this method, or they call sync over async, it's the same.
Yeah, I think they're buying into that.
If everyone does
from
sync
an Azure
API.
perspective.
Yeah.
I was going to say from an Azure perspective, like Christoph, I don't know, forced our hand or called our bluff or whatever the right term is. He's already added synchronous methods to Azure SDK.
Yeah.
There is nothing that we can do right now to make Azure SDK worse.
I agree, but
You agree with his mischaracterization?
keep in mind another. Look, we also control the runtime, right? Another thing we could do is gateways within the runtime to make sync over async better and make it not encounter thread starvation and other things that commonly plague the ecosystem. Like that's work that we can investigate.
We can certainly make it better. I don't know how to make it good.
Right, we can't make it good, but maybe we can make it much less likely an actual server will fall over dead.
But to me, you're still patching the symptom. Like to me, I think a much more viable approach is basically how do you inform the ecosystem faster? Like I guess the real fix is people have to override the methods and do whatever is appropriate, right? And And that the thing is, how do you bubble this up?
We've done this. So this thing about exactly. I'm with you. This thing about like us having default implementations that don't do the right thing. We've done it many times already, and we just said, too bad. The ecosystem will take some time for the ecosystem to catch up.
I'm not worried about that.
And it's a trap we never dig ourselves out of.
It's just this perpetuation of like sync and async, different methods, different code paths that everyone has to kind of do, and there's no way out.
We already have that.
There's no way out.
So, by the way, if HTTP client didn't give you stream that has a synchronous read,
I get it.
I think it would be a different discussion in my book. But we kind of like, we like have sync APIs for majority of the networking. We just don't have the one that initiates. Well, what are we getting?
Christoph, does that mean that the majority of people actually get the stream and interact with the stream? I would have guessed that the majority of developers just want get byte array or just get stream or string async rather.
God, I hope not.
Well, so are you talking about people who use HTTP client directly, or are you saying in Azure SDK?
Both. I mean, neither of those are what we want them to do from a performance perspective, but from a simplicity perspective, I would imagine most people aren't directly interacting with the stream. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, so
no, you're right.
In Azure SDK, they are not interacting directly from a stream, but we still use the stream. I was making the argument that forget about Azure SDK. We have an HTTP client, and if I'm in a synchronous context, I would call send async and then get result. And then, after I get the stream, I would probably just keep using the synchronous read, the synchronous method.
Agreed. So I super understand, I'm not pushing back per se, but I think we aren't doing the other thing, which is to find out all the places that only have sync, like APIs. When are you only in a sync context? Is the question, and then fix those piecemeal. Still do this, but then also the other thing, so that the excuse that you're in a sync method goes away, because that is the killer, right?
Yeah, I actually think that by doing this, thinking about this a bit more, fixing the issues that you mentioned, and having the analyzer, the situation can actually get better.
Yes.
Because today we don't have an analyzer, we don't think about these things, and as I said, people just probably do sync over async for the first get, and then they read synchronously from a stream, and they kind of don't understand the implications.
I would also say that Chris's point earlier was like we never dig ourselves out of that hole. I don't think it's that bad, because keep in mind that the vast majority of people's apps don't need that level of scale. Like unless you deadlock, which is the problem that you have in your apps, even if people do the super naive thing like get string async and then they just do dot result and then they parse the string, whatever. Like, I mean, if you have like a few thousand requests a day, it's not going to break your app, right? And so I also don't think that in practice it's just that pervasive of a problem.
No.
I think the areas where you find it, it's very bad, but I think
if you don't have anything real, if you have like dinky internal apps, I super agree. Yeah, any kind of scale, like we have seen this bug appear on ASCII. The reason we went out of our way to throw an exception,
right,
is because it happens so often. It was just like every library, this happened all the time. And
I understand that, but I'm saying the amount of people that need that scale, compared to the number of customers we have, it is a much smaller number.
It is.
So that means, yes, for us it sucks. And because it sucks, especially for us, when you include third-party libraries that we depend on in our closure, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like that's also not unworkable, because of that says we know who the library authors are and we can work with them, right? Like it's people like James Newton King or gRPC or whatever. And then like that one I'm less concerned about. I'm more concerned about the long tail of people we don't have a relationship with, because we don't depend on them. We're not using them anywhere in our services, and most customers, who use them also don't have that scale problem.
They should be using the async APIs. Anyway.
But you see, you just said that you're seeing this problem, this bug a lot. You're seeing this bug because people call sync over async, correct? Well,
not just directly, also indirectly.
Yeah. But I'm saying by us having these APIs, it will actually help in some situations.
It does.
Yeah.
But I don't want to. So like, when you're in ASP.NET Core, even if you call the sync method, you're still blocking a pool thread. It's not sync over async, but you're still blocking a pool thread anyway, right?
Sure.
It's less bad, but it's not great.
And in a lot of cases, so
To David's point, there are multiple things we can do here. We can add these synchronous methods, and we can add other synchronous methods in places where we feel like it's super impactful. We can find every place where we ourselves should be exposing async functionality and we're not, and we can go and add those async methods, just like we can go find places where we're not respecting cancellation token and make sure we do.
Right.
We can find our own places where from synchronous contexts, we're forced to call async stuff and block, and we can go and add the appropriate paths all the way up that are async in addition to sync. The big problem I think we've all seen is the customers that, whether it's because of a brownfield app or some interface that they're being forced to implement or whatever, they just have no other choice.
Yep.
Or Jeremy's case, there's every possible API that possibly lets him do what he needs to do calls him in a synchronous fashion.
Then the fix is like the runtime. Nothing else you could do. The ECL.
And make the thread tool improve its heuristics and aggressiveness and find the right balance. Because we can go the other way and anyone queues up any amount of load and the whole app crashes.
Yeah. This is awful.
Well,
Awful.
sometimes your job is to pick the least bad option.
This isn't bad.
Oh.
I'm just sad at the overall stuff.
Yeah.
Are we targeting all users who want to use sync, or are we targeting specific customers? Like, would it make sense for this to be editor browsable never, so that only the experts would override it all?
No, I'd keep it public. Like, are we gonna have HP? Is HP client there too? Send.
Yeah.
Synchronous,
It's all good.
but not the overloads for get, put, post. Just the top level send async, right? Send,
Yeah,
not
if
send
you
async.
scroll down, there's a full change of what was proposed. We decided that we didn't want to do all of them.
Yeah, I think we should start small. I think long term people will want more, but I think by starting small it gives us some time for the community, the third parties, to catch up.
Right.
And second thing is, if it turns out that our fears were true, then we can kind of, we can hide it a bit more. If basically, the fears that we are now expressing actually don't come true, then we can add get.
I mean, if you want to contain it, I think just having the most complicated overload available is fine. Like, this is the most awkward to call, right? It's the least convenient one, so you have to write more lines of code. So it's probably easier for people to just slam async on whatever method they're in and then deal with that fallout than try to call the other method.
It is. So would we block this and say like in .NET 5 you can now do sync HTTP calls? Is that like a thing you would say?
Well, I think that would be something like a Steven blog post where you're like, it's there, but here's why you don't want to use it, and here's why you might want to use it, but you are the 1%.
Yeah,
so
I would not say, I would never, like, me personally, I would never write a blog, this is so awful, you should never use it. I think we could use it as an opportunity to educate some people, basically explain the complexity here, saying we added it because of these very complex reasons, and actually there are some cases where it's going to improve your situation, and there are some cases where you shouldn't be using it.
Yeah, to me it's kind of like value task, right? Like,
yeah.
It's like the default is you use task, but there's good reason I want to use value task, and that's the same thing here.
Always like that. Okay.
It's a bit early to be wrong that often, David.
This is just. Right. So I mean, like, given that get and put, etc. aren't virtual, they're just utility methods to build the message for you. Why wouldn't we just go ahead and add them?
So my feeling on that is, I don't know if it's right to encourage people to use these, and I think people using straight up send are maybe slightly more advanced than the people just calling get async and that sort of thing. This would be kind of a guard to make sure that they don't accidentally call synchronous. Also, there's like 50 methods we'd have to implement.
But they're all boilerplate. They're all every single one of them is you just build the message and then call the right thing.
No, it's just the speed bump, right? But I think to me, I like those speed bumps more than editor browsable, because that means the people that want to use it, their experience is not massively deteriorated, and the people that are the flyby commenters equivalent for an API user, they're not willing to write the 5 lines of boilerplate, right? Yeah. I think that is a decent filter. And as Christoph said, if we get decent feedback and we think it's a fine API, we can always add it.
I mean, I guess really all that I care, because I'm calling by reflection anyway, all that I care is that you have get byte array that I can call. So you can declare it internal, like I'm calling you a reflection.
We can add an internal method just
I cannot believe that thing called.
But it's the if the sync is going to have a sync.
I have to find that code.
If the sync is going to have a better for sync path, then that's the one that I.
So what thing is that? Is that the certificate callback when you have to download the cert or something, or?
Mainly when you have to download, when we're on Linux, where we're responsible for doing the download ourselves, and you said you wanted revocation, and we don't have the revocation list locally, we have to go get it. And so, if you're doing revocation more than once, then this is once every 30 days for the same user on the same machine. And so it's not all the time, but it's like when I need to do it, I need to do it. And right now we do sync over async because it's the only way we can use this type.
Speaking of which, it's a bit of a side. Why don't you use dynamic for situations like this as opposed to reflection? Is there a big difference?
No, I've never seen dynamic used in the VCL ever.
No one likes dynamic.
Also, dynamic is basically your.
I'm asking because we just recently.
Dynamic doesn't bind to internals.
Oh, really?
Unless you use
I think
David
it's
Evans'
public
super awesome tool.
I see. Yes, that is probably for him the main reason.
There's a package.
I mean, really, right now all I'm doing is calling public members, but I'm happy to call an internal member if we don't want to make the one that I need.
Also, dynamic is not lightweight.
I mean, in which assembly are
Super
you?
efficient.
In which assembly are you calling this code? Is it
From
in
which
a-
assembly?
No, yes.
X5 and I certificates.
Oh, okay. So it could, because dynamic is in whatever system dynamic.nl.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so our first hour
Hold on,
is about to
we
be
just
up.
had a discussion.
What do we say?
So yeah, I mean, we have a few more minutes to actually finish this thing. So like,
Yeah, it's awesome.
all right. So then I guess we talked a bit about the shape of these APIs here. So I made these guys mirror these in the proposal. Any concern on the handlers? I mean, they seem pretty much like just adding the corresponding set method that seems reasonable.
Can we see the content? Like below you have some content.
Yeah, I think these are all the derivatives, right? So
Yeah,
why are they
Keep scrolling.
why are they protected internal?
That's just how handlers are made.
I see.
So you can only call it from a invoker.
Oh, they're all protected logically. I see. Okay. Content. All right.
So we're adding copy to and serialized to stream.
Yeah, same feedback as earlier. We should probably just mirror the CLS to stream.
So I also, it's a related feature request, but not the same. The synchronous methods on HTTP content don't take cancellation token.
Isn't that already filed?
Some of
That's
them.
an issue?
Yeah, it's an issue. It's
On core effects, right?
should it be done in the same sweep? So like we don't have.
So
Did we add it already?
we've discussed making all of these synchronous timeout things work on that stream that's returned.
I'm talking about async methods on HTTP content. They don't take cancellation tokens.
So let's stream async.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
But it does-
We got the two right there.
Is that brand new?
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
It's in core, right?
Oh,
It's not in
very
full framework.
I see. Steve, is that something that was added recently?
Yeah, like 3 weeks ago.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Then it's done. Awesome.
You're the .NET Standard train. I'm sorry.
Steve is 3 weeks before Michael.
But with .NET 5, your code base is awesome.
Well, as I said, we're gonna do a light up. We're gonna have a transport that lights up on .NET 5. It's gonna do the sync over sync and then use the cancellation token that was added 3 weeks ago.
I don't use dynamic.
And then we consider using dynamic as well.
All right. So then my other question is: so should we mirror these overloads then? To what we said earlier. Or should we just make them optional? We should do one or the other, I think.
This is such a low-level API, nobody calls it. I wouldn't worry about
Yeah, I don't know if it's
usability here and optional.
To me, it's more like self-consistency on the type. It seems weird to have one structure here and then a different structure here. It seems like we just make our lives more visible than it needs to be.
Maybe.
Wait. I mean, that was the previous proposal, right? It was just blindly mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah, except for the other type, it kind of matters because it's a publicly called API. This one is like,
no one uses this.
nobody calls it directly.
Until you add an overload, you have to figure out how you squeeze it in on both ends.
I guess, is null accepted for context?
Yes.
Or I guess whatever default of transport context is?
Yeah, if you're not encrypted, it's null.
So this is a bit weird.
Yeah, these methods are
Copy to
largely
is like-
only called inside of HTTP client.
Okay.
Yeah, the pain here is just implementing these when you define your own content.
You don't, right? You only override serialized stream async, and then those are all just same call.
Well, you'd override serialized to stream, the synchronous version.
Yep.
Is there a sync version? Oh,
Yeah.
I see it. There it is.
There's now.
That's the proposal.
Copy to is weird, but I get it.
This abstract virtual film, was that the one where we had this big discussion where we saddened ourselves by adding constellation token to that one?
I think so, yeah.
So now you should override both forever, right?
Which goes back to the
If you want to support cancellation.
we want metadata of this is the one you should be overriding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, the other ones seem just override, so that I don't care. Are we okay then with that as proposed? Leave it as is, or?
I guess my standing question is, should we default to cancellation tokens? Because I think a lot of synchronous users just don't have cancellation.
As I said, nobody calls these APIs directly.
Oh, these APIs I'm less concerned with. It's more the above, the send methods.
The same ones we just mirror the other ones, so you always have an overload that doesn't take one.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that case, I think we're fine.
Yeah. All right.
Can you keep scrolling? Is there anything else?
No, there is really not much.
Just
more.
adding the
There's
implementation.
just the overrides. And then the full
HTTP
change.
client. So you keep talking about these HTTP client overloads, where the with and without cancellation token, or sorry, with and without the completion option. Those actually have different behaviors
Right, but there's
than the explicit interface.
right, but like there's one that takes just the request. There's one that takes the request and the cancellation token. There's one that takes request and completion, and then there's one that takes request, completion option, and cancellation token. Right, so you mirror the same structure here. So
But I was saying HTTP message invoker Sunday sync and HTTP client Sunday sync have different behavior.
Yes.
There's a new, you're saying there's like a new override or so. It's like a protected versus the public or something, right, Chris? I forget the exact details, but there's some way that HTTP client effectively hides the base message invoker one.
Right, it's probably an explicit interface or because you're adding this new send overload to the invoker, but it will be different than the implementation that's on HTTP client.
Right. That's what I was saying. Whatever we do for the sync methods should just be an exact duplicate of what we do for the async.
Yeah.
all right. Then anything else to add, or is that it?
Approved. That's it.
Then let me just copy and paste my notes in.
With a broken heart, approved.
Going back in time. Back in time, Chris thought.
I think we should end.
Like in .NET 5, we're adding sync APIs. This just feels so wrong. Sync, not sync APIs. They do I/O.
Just like
But the
Stream.read
worst.
does.
It's the worst
They
combination.
already exist in
the
.NET
worst
5.
combination.
It already exists. Stream.read.
Right, but we're adding new ones.
That can be explained as legacy. This is just like you can't explain
Well,
this.
it can be explained as legacy, just not our legacy.
This can't be explained at all.
It can
Someone
be.
else
Steve just
is
explained it.
forcing us to do this.
I like that. Put it in the post.
Alright, so then you're happy to stick around, but otherwise
I'm gonna leave, but I'm just trying to like process what just happened.
you're
Are you
still
coming to lunch?
No.
I'll buy you none too.
You will?
Yes.
but only if you also take hot tea.
That tea is awful. You know water. This has colors. That's what it is.
Your description of tea seems very...
Not all tea, that tea.
The queen would cry if you would tell her that.
Oh, everyone should read that blog post that guy wrote, like, who works on Dart. What color is your function? And then look at this, and then cry in a corner.
So what color is your function?
Yeah, it's about async and sync methods in a platform, and how Dart is adding async methods, same as C#, and they explain this problem of having sync and async APIs. And when you're in some cases, like one can call the other. Like if you're async, you can call sync, but in the other way you can't do it. And how it forks the entire code base.
And they explain as the graph coloring problem?
No, they just said like imagine a language that had two different color functions, red and blue, and it's a comparison to async await. Red is sync and blue is async.
I see.
And you can't call reds and blues and vice versa.
So these are purple APIs.
It's purple API.
We could just make this seal our magic. Oh, my.
Alright. So that was faster than I thought. Why who wants to explain this?
Sure. So, okay, in C# 7, as part of the novelty feature, we added a bunch of attributes that guide the compiler. For example, not null, or not null if not null. We have a whole set. For C# 8, we're proposing to add two more attributes.
C# 9.
Sorry, C# 9. So I was out by one for both of those. C# 8 and then C# 9. Sorry for that. And I thought about it, but anyways. So easy to lose track. This one was prompted by our adoption efforts as well as some feedback from users. The scenario is you're calling the method and you want to tell the compiler I will have initialized certain members by the time this method returns. This is useful for constructor scenarios, which are currently a big pain point. And it's also useful when you have patterns like you call a property will tell you if your object is initialized, and then if you call that, then it's safe to call something else, and you know those are initialized. So
or more like a ensure initialized method that will check, and if it's not initialized, we'll ensure that it is.
Yep. So if you scroll down, there's an API proposed. So there's two attributes that are proposed. One is MemberNotNull, and the other one is MemberNotNullWhen. You give it a list of names of fields or properties, and for the conditional one, you also say if it's in the when true branch or in the when false branch. We do allow multiple of these attributes. So you have the choice of either putting a list of fields in a single attribute, or you can repeat the attribute with different fields. And then the rest is default, like inherits is false, which is a default. And then you can put this on methods and properties.
Do we have a usage example?
It's in the LDM notes.
It's literally here in the bullet points.
So at the bottom there's just a usage example, but if you scroll up there's an actual use case where...
So I don't understand, when would you apply multiple of those?
You can, basically that's just a syntactic choice. You can apply just one with multiple names or multiple attributes with a single name each. The scenario where we thought people would prefer to put multiple attributes is if you have any sort of cogeneration or analyzer that adds those for you, then it's easier to just say, I'll add the attribute regardless.
Yeah, but still, I understand why you want two options.
Yeah.
What is the scenario for applying it more than once? Because it's constrained to, not constrained, but the usage is you apply it to like a field or a pattern.
Ensure initialized method, for example.
You apply it to the method
Oh,
that
you
is
apply it
doing the
to a
initialization.
method. Oh, okay, okay.
And it says ensure initialized ensures that
okay.
all these other fields, multiple fields are.
Can you scroll to the attribute definition? Because I thought it said the usage is property. Property. And
Methods and properties, and then what you name are properties or fields.
Yes, I get it.
You might have an is default property, for example.
Right. Yep.
How does this, Julian, let's say I have a property where the getter guarantees this, but the setter does not. What happens if this is applied?
This is on. That's a language question. I have to look at the current proposal. I think only the getter actually, this attribute only informs the getter.
So what happens if I have, so think conversely, what happens if I have a property that wraps a field, and so by setting the setter it initializes the field, this can't work for that?
I think so.
Probably not great.
Yeah, that's probably be rediscussed.
So the setter, you'd like to affect the setter?
Well,
as
just to understand, I mean, I think it's certainly the most well, by far, I would say like the 90% case, well, maybe the 80% case for .NET runtime is the constructor, and then the 95% case is the the 15% case is the ensure initialized method. It's pretty rare that we have a property that does this, but there are a few cases where setting a property will, guarantee that a field has been set, and I'd have to check to see if we then subsequently use the field directly. But if it did, you'd want it to be.
Yeah, I will double check. I know that I tested that in my OpenPR, but I don't. I thought I excluded the setter. I'll double check.
It does seem.
I assume it's an error. I assume the compiler validates or checks if there's conflicts between it applying multiple attributes, or maybe possible. Maybe. I guess it's not possible.
Well, what would a conflict look like?
No, it's more like if you reference something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I think that one we do enforce.
And while you could express certain patterns that would be more succinctly expressed, I assume the compiler doesn't more. Like if I say member not null when true X, member not null when false X, that's okay. It's just the same as member not null
Correct.
X.
Yeah, it's the same as the behavior for maybe null when true and maybe null when false.
Right.
And presumably you don't want this to be inherited.
Correct.
And we need to specify this because the default apparently is that it's.
So we've kept the default for inheritance. We kept that default for all the nullability attributes.
I just looked at the code. Like they all say inherited equals false, and the default is true apparently. So that's why I'm saying maybe we should apply this here. But to be clear, we don't want it to be inherited, right? Because that's what we said everywhere else.
Yeah, we don't want them to be inherited.
Why don't you want it to be inherited?
Much like the rest of the attributes, you need to respecify them as part. We need to enforce that you use them correctly as part of the
Sorry, when you Emo, you looked at other nullability attributes.
Yeah, I looked at the. I think maybe null when attribute. I think was the one I looked at.
And
but it looked like in the file it all said.
Which is what that matches my recollection. Stephen, do you see a reason to do this one differently than other nullability attributes?
Well, just trying to. It's possible I'm thinking about it incorrectly, but let's say I have an ensure initialized method that's virtual. Then the derived class doesn't specify any of these things. And base class ends up calling on a concrete instance of the derived type, it ends up calling that ensure initialize method.
But the
Does that
subtype,
mean-
the subtype ensure implementation may actually not initialize the field. Is
Or
that the-
may not issue other fields, but
I thought we were
I
planning
guess
to.
it may not call the base, you're saying.
Julian,
Yeah,
I thought we were
exactly.
planning to enforce that you have to copy these attributes.
Well, you might not be able to.
If the
Yes,
subclass
there's
type
the
isn't
type
compiled
not
with
access to
nullability.
bases.
So
So, sorry, I talked over you, Steve.
I was saying that the derived class may not have access to the base fields.
Correct. I will add some validation on inheritance scenarios. This is a little bit tricky because it implies if you're calling the derived ensure initialized, we should count that not only the attributes or the fields that you declare as initialized are now not null, but also your bases. Basically, each level of inheritance is responsible for its own fields.
Maybe, except I'm contradicting myself. It's possible the derived type doesn't delegate to the base, so the base's implementation may be totally ignored.
But also you can't really fix that, right? Because if the fields are private, then the only party that could actually see this is the base type itself, and that one saw the annotations from before the override.
Well, that's what I mean. The
Yeah.
derived can't re-specify everything to be 100% correct, but at the same time, you can't depend on the basis attribution because it may have been overridden.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll raise. That's an LDM question. I'll raise that.
I think our rationale from last time was we can't combine across inheritance. It's like, do you collect them all? Do you replace? And that's I think why we said like you have to re-specify to decide what to
plus
do.
there's an issue if you have a new field in derived, then when you say I'm initializing this field, then it's really yours. It's not your basis.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, what feels unique to me about this one as compared to the previous attributes is the other attributes, they were always about like that method or that, parameters. And so the derived class got to specify for its override, like what its parameters were. But here it's referring to fields, which is new.
Okay. Let me follow up with LDM with that inheritance question.
And from my perspective, other than those issues, if we can solve those issues, then the attribute seems fine.
Yeah, the attribute. I think naming wise, I mean the only thing I find somewhat odd is that you can both use the params one as well as specify multiple times. That's I feel like relatively rare. Normally in the BCL we do one or the other. In fact, I don't think we do params at all in attributes. We mostly default to you apply multiple times.
It would become rather verbose, though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not trying to make a statement. I'm just saying, like, from what we have done in the past, because it is relatively rare. What do you pass in for the bool?
Whether it's when true or when false.
So if you have a method that's called isDefault.
Oh, I see.
You say
it's always the return of the method or property.
Correct.
Julian, what happens if I have, let's say I have class B derived from A, and A has a protected field foo, and B has a protected new field foo. Can I only refer to B.foo and not A.foo?
In B, you can only refer to B.foo.
I mean, I could use base.foo in normal syntax, but in this attribute, I could only refer to B.foo.
Correct.
We did, if I recall, we did talk about allowing you to like in the future allowing you to say base or something like that. But at least for the initial version, it's like this is such a. I think that's such a rare use case that it's basically not.
I mean, I think I was just looking. I just did a search for equals null bang in .NET Runtime. There's about 300 cases of it, and special cases aside, this would probably knock out 250 of them.
About being able to specify base dot?
No.
Oh,
the attribute.
okay.
The attribute will solve most of
Okay.
that category of problem.
I thought you were saying the base dot was going to solve
No, I
250
was
of
saying,
300
like,
issues. And I was like, what?
It's a rare.
Does the nullable mechanism right now special case nullable of T dot has value? Because that seems like the prime candidate for this attribute.
It does special case that.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's why it works.
Yeah, all over the place.
Yeah.
We have a class that calls init and then initializes 10 fields on the type.
Yeah.
And today we work around that by having equals null exclamation point on all those fields because they really are non-nullable, but the compiler doesn't see that.
Do any of those scenarios involve virtual or like overridden methods?
Probably not. I'd have to go check.
We tend to do this within the constructor almost always. Not always,
I think
but most.
the only one that would involve virtual would be like an ensure initialized, and for the most part, there's no inheritance there. Usually that ensure initialized thing is some private method. It's probably initializing a byte array or something like that.
Yeah, the more I think about the inheritance scenario, if you, let's say you're writing a constructor, you're gonna call base, and that guarantees all the basis fields were initial or not null if they're declared as not null.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to think of a correct implementation that wouldn't also delegate to base after initializing other stuff. It's just not guaranteed.
Yeah. It seems like one alternative you have in the compiler is to just say when you apply this attribute to a virtual method and you don't, or it's applied to the base but you don't call base, that's probably a bug.
But yeah. But I'm trying to picture, like, could we write a scenario? And is it
You're saying
is it gonna
there's a
look
scenario where
is it gonna look realistic or semi-useful, or is it?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head where you would be correct in not delegating.
Yeah.
It's just not guaranteed that you delegated.
I mean, in fairness, you will probably find them very quickly if you forget, because nothing will probably work. But like, it seems like that's a bug that maybe the compiler can help you with.
Okay, so what I heard, the proposal is if you put this attribute on a method on an override, then we say you must call your base.
Or if the base has the attribute
Or
applied.
the attribute has it.
Because it also seems weird, right? Because if the base has the attribute but then the drive does not, and you don't call base, you have the same bug, right? Like.
But it assumes that base, the only thing that it does is initializes the fields. The base may be doing things that you actually don't want to happen in the subtype.
But then the compiler can still check that you also initialized all these things that the base said you will do. Right?
Okay, sorry, it would do those two
it
things.
could
It will not
validate
force
that,
you to call the base. It only forces you to call the base if you don't initialize.
Yeah, so we would collect all of them.
So far they're public,
And in the trade-off is we make sure that you called it.
The problem though is privates, right?
Yeah, and if there are privates and your base method does something that you don't want to happen,
You're screwed.
You're screwed.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Shouldn't code like that.
Thankfully, Sprout, the ramifications of it aren't particularly significant. No more so than saying, string array equals new string array. I didn't think I had nulls. Oh wait, it's entirely null.
So Steve, my other question I have is, so the case where we have this in the BCL, ensure initialized, is it fair to say that in every method where we dereference initialized members, we always have a call to ensure initialized?
Every no, many yes.
That means you still have some cases where the compiler gives us purist warnings?
Yes, we will absolutely have some cases. It's not rare, but it's not the majority.
And
like there are places where, because of like structural guarantees or expectations on usage, we just assume that when you get to method foo, various things have already been initialized.
I see.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do, right? Or the compiler can do, probably.
No, I mean, we do one of two things. Either we lie and say the fields are non-nullable, and then the places where that wasn't true were wrong, or we use exclamation points on all the uses in the places where we know it's fine.
So there's a couple of things you could do, just brainstorming for that scenario. You said you could put the fields aren't mark them not nullable. You could put suppressions. You could put assertions. But there's another thing you could do. You could call an ensure init method that's conditional, and the compiler will and you mark it with MemberNotNull. And basically, this is your custom assertion that says, hey, here's a bunch of fields. I know that they're initialized.
So you mark it conditional to make the compiler link it.
For the most, you just
so it's going to be raised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times, though, it's logic that asserts don't handle. It's factoring in multiple fields or based on some conditional, and the compiler just doesn't track that.
So this attribute gives you one more option.
Yeah.
But I mean, this will cover the majority case of the things that we are initializing during construction, just not in the body of the constructor, and things that are being initialized by a helper method that's being called before every use.
Stephen, did you see the question from Cyrus? Should there be a member null attribute for methods that might reset members back to their null state? Like Julian said, they haven't seen cases like this, but have you?
Those definitely happen, but I've never seen it where you then access the members in the same call.
I see.
So you're thinking like a reset
attribute.
Yeah, so
like you definitely call reset, but then we don't immediately try and dereference the thing that was reset.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that I've been able to come up with is you could have some kind of like some type of resettable object, where you call reset, and then somebody later in the code accidentally in some other if dereferences something that was reset.
I mean, we have types that do that, like list, string builder, things like that.
But it's usually the last call.
It is the last call. Yeah, we don't have code that runs after it.
In which case, it doesn't buy anything really. Yeah, it seems reasonable. So then, I guess no more feedback. Can we then just?
I know it's not this, but it's something potentially tracking where I'll just say the one that I got hit by this recently, like RSA export parameters gives back a structure that says all of its stuff is nullable because someone could have created them with null, but the promise of export parameters is these particular fields will not be null on the return struct.
Yes. So we discussed a variant of this attribute, possibly with a different name, where instead of saying my return value or output parameter is not null, you could say not only is it not null, but its members, some of its members are not null. That is a separate proposal. I think we were talking about extending the not null attributes to say not just this parameter or the return value is not null, but you'd also list members of that type.
Members of the return value.
Yeah.
So we should for that one in particular, we've got we've got a handful of structs where we've made the decision that even though they're public and all their fields are public and all their fields are reference types, and so someone could just say default foo dot whatever and get back a null, we've made them non-nullable because you expect that they're only given back to you by APIs in the framework that will have initialized them all to non-null. And so while technically we're not telling the truth, we wouldn't be doing anyone a favor by telling the truth. That attribute, in theory, would allow us to tell the truth. We would instead go back and annotate them all as nullable, and then the methods that return them would say, no, but really they're all not nullable.
Well, the only downside to that would then be, let's say I take one of these structs and I do something with it, and then I return it to whoever called me. Right now, we're basically forcing those attributes to propagate throughout all of users' code.
Yes.
Which, we can argue the benefits are.
There was another proposal related to this, which was to make the struct non-defaultable. I don't remember why that proposal sank, but it did sink.
Well, there was the allowing you to override new, which was a framework issue, right? We couldn't, but we should be able to do that in Core CLR.
Yeah. So anyway, this is veering a little bit off topic, but those are...
Yeah, all I was going to say was if that's an avenue we want to pursue, it'd be great to do it for .NET 5.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a collection of proposals or attributes. I will make sure to document this one for consideration. So Emo, the way I would summarize, if I gathered the feedback correctly, is we're good with the shape of these attributes. I'll update the proposal with, or you did inherited is equals false, and we're waiting, like we shouldn't make that change just yet until we hear back from LDM on the behavior for inherited scenarios.
Yeah, that's basically what I asked you. So
in case it affects the API service.
Right. All right. Then.
And you're okay with the params string? I looked in that standard. There are no attributes that accept.
It seems a bit odd, but I do buy the argument that if you have to initialize like 6 fields, I mean, it's never going to be pretty, but.
I agree. You would open the thing and then let it dissipate. So I'm sure that we're closed as being okay on that.
The one downside of params is basically you're kind of screwed in terms of the constructor. Like it's very somewhat hard to add to this unless it's a non-string, right? And then you can, but it gets messy. But seems unlikely for these attributes. So, all right. So then,
the only thing that I do wonder, so we allow multiples in order to like make code generation scenarios easier, and I just don't know if I buy that.
So I mean, there's an alternative which is to say just do the params but remove the allow multiple.
Yeah. I mean, the one question is like as soon as you have both, like what happens if they're conflicting, right?
So there is a scenario. It's super weird, but the MemberNotNullWhen, you could imagine a scenario where you actually need multiple, one for the one true and one for the one false. So when it's true, it's initialized set A of fields, and when false, it initialized set B of fields, which is like really weird. But
yeah, so you would MemberNotNullWhen would need multiple.
Maybe.
But
it's a stretch. I'm making it up.
But what happens if you now apply? I guess you always combine the lists, right? So I guess
right. I mean, the only fix for that would be to just not take the boolean and have MemberNotNull when true, MemberNotNull when false.
Right, but that's different from what attributes.
Right. Well, but this is because it's naming something else.
Correct.
And it would be that would let you say allow multiple as false, while still saying you can have a false one and a true one.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you. Like, why do we think that no multiple makes it easier for code gen? Like, you have to know the shape of the attribute.
Can a partial method hold attributes that gets applied to the real implementation?
They have to match, I believe.
Yeah. Either I think you can omit it on the implementation, or they have to match. There's something like that. But anyways, here we're not changing the rules on partials.
Well, because I could understand that if a partial method declaration would apply attributes in a union, because then you would say, as part of this split, I promise that there will be this method, and that
I don't think
it will
union either has to match or you have to omit them, but there's no kind of.
Then it doesn't sound a whole lot like code generators would benefit from it.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is tempted to change to allow multiple equal false.
At least for MemberNotNull. MemberNotNullWhen might need
and maybe both.
Although I don't think we've done this in the other case, right?
Well, maybe NullWhen false and maybe NullWhen true. If you allow multiple there, it doesn't, right? Because it's maybe NullWhen false and true. Just replace it with maybe null. Here, it's actually this could be saying these member A and B are initialized when false, and C and D are initialized when true. Right? You could.
But I can't think of a practical application where I want to do that.
That's a separate question.
Yeah.
Guess worst case, you just split it in two methods.
Yes.
No? I don't know how that would work, but I don't think it matters.
I'm okay to say don't do that.
Yeah.
So I was saying allow multiples false for both of
So
them.
like the concrete scenarios we have are like is default, enter initialized, is init, those kind of scenarios, and those will always be initialized in one branch, not initialized in the other. So
I can write code that would need both, but I can't think of whenever anybody would have it that wasn't a degenerate example.
Yeah. All right. So then let's just go with this. So these are the notes. Then we have 20 more minutes to actually review some other stuff.
when we hear back from LDM, what's the process? Do we need another review, or just I ping you?
I mean, if so, basically two of these. I mean, the first one is just a question for behavior. I don't think it changes the APIs. The second one is more about, well, I mean, if you insist on having a multiple, I think that's fine. If it's just like maybe we shouldn't make them,
yeah.
and so you either make it true or either make it false. But I think both of them are approved.
So you're okay with whatever LDM comes back with? Cool.
It's just something to think about.
Thank you very much.
All right, then, unless somebody wants to jump the queue. Oh, there's one marked blocking.
Yes, because we couldn't figure out what label to put on it. It's the ASCII one that I was promised we'd get to today.
It's like, did I promise that?
That's why you marked it blocked.
Did I?
So that it would jump the queue.
All right.
22 minutes we'll be pushing it, but we can go through as much as we possibly can.
Oh, fuck, it's this list. Yeah.
No. Basically, it's a way to do comparison and operations on ASCII text.
Didn't he ask for it?
He asked for it, Corey asked for it, some people...
You definitely have to buy lunch.
A fair number of people, it turns out, ask for this. This is very useful when it comes to things, especially like networking, because most networking protocols are actually not UTF-8, not UTF-16, they're just straight up ASCII. And you want to check for things.
Is this ASCII 7 or ASCII 8?
ASCII 7.
Okay.
I actually define terminology at the top of this.
Excuse me, what is ASCII 7? What is ASCII 8?
ASCII is basically every byte where the high bit's not set.
What's the behavior if the high bit is set?
There's a default behavior at the top of this that says, unless a method says otherwise, here's a behavior that the method has. So for instance, equality comparison methods will treat non-ASCII bytes as opaque, and if the same byte occurs both in the left and the right, it says sure it's equal. Things like ToUpper and ToLower, those bytes get propagated as is. If you're comparing ASCII against UTF-16 and we see a non-ASCII byte, we fail. Because there's no way to know what was supposed to, there's no way to know what the text originally was supposed to have meant, so we just fail at that point.
So how does it interact with Latin 1?
Latin 1 is a superset of this.
Yes, it uses the last bit.
So it sounds like what he just described would apply.
There are certain things that will work for Latin 1 here. For example, you can compare, like the equals method is really Latin 1, not ASCII.
Okay.
As long as what's on both sides are read-only span of byte. If you have read-only span of byte and read-only span of char on either side, it's ASCII, not Latin 1.
Because, you said that lots of protocols are ASCII, but some of them are technically Latin 1.
The only Latin 1 protocol that's still in wide use is HTTP header processing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of important protocol.
Well, the thing is, if you're sending non-ASCII data over HTTP headers, like God help you, because any server you send it to is going to interpret it differently.
Right.
Like honestly, it comes down to please don't do that from your client or your server. It's not really something people support.
Yeah, I don't think the HTTP client uses Latin 1 anywhere. I think it's either ASCII or UTF-8.
Yeah, so originally, I brought this a while back, and it was just equals, and that was it. And you're like, oh, we should add an entire suite of APIs to it, so here's an entire suite of APIs.
Well, I think what I said was we should think about it. I did not say that.
I thought about it, I had a 6-hour flight, and I'm like, I'm doing this. I did this on a plane, so these are... I was suffering oxygen deprivation because I was on a plane when I wrote this, so you're welcome.
So what I'm hearing is we should not trust any of the things you have written.
No.
By the way, do we now have the same thing for UTF-8?
UTF-8,
UTF-8
there is a
yes?
separate proposal for UTF-8 version.
But it's not yet approved.
That's correct.
Okay.
What do we call the UTF-8 one?
UTF-8.
What do you mean, what do we call it?
We already have a type in UTF-8, right? These are just
we do,
there
yeah.
would be methods.
We have a type called UTF-8. System.text.unicode is a namespace.
Do we not have a span.indexOf
That already
that's a
exists?
span needle?
Sorry?
There's an index of here. Do we not have a span equivalent of that? Because the index of will not be doing anything, right? It's
Oh,
just
the only reason for index of there is because it complements index of ignore case.
Okay.
That's the only reason for it, honestly.
So if we add the UTF-8 API, what namespace you said it would be?
It could. Right now, there's a UTF-8 class in System Text Unicode. That class is really intended for like transcoding UTF-8 data. We could add those methods there. We could add it under System Buffers Text.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, would it make sense to have them all in some namespace?
That's fine. I would rather get through the API surface than the namespace and class name right now.
Yeah.
Just because we're down to 17 minutes left.
All right, let's just walk the list.
Okay. So first, the first group is compare to ASCII buffers for equality, either case sensitive or case insensitive. Again, equals is basically span.sequence equal. The only reason it's here is because it complements the case insensitive one. The name I chose ordinal ignore case because it logically is string comparison.ordinal ignore case, but I am fine with changing that name if needed.
So some of the parameters are called search space. Is that for some kind of consistency? It's kind of such a weird term.
It's a term we use in within our code, but I don't think we have it as part of our API service. Let me check to see what memory extensions called it.
Obviously, they should be needle and haystack. Or in this case, haystack and needle.
They're called span and value for the memory extensions APIs because you're searching for the value.
I think both are actually weird. Search space is a bit weird, and target, frankly, is confusing.
Yeah.
Because target, to me, implies that something is done to it.
So let's ignore that for now. Let's do the first group. Let's just go in order. So the very first two, do we even need an API, which is literally an equivalent to span.sequence equal? Again, the only reason I have it is because there's an ignore case one there. And I figured that if there's an ignore case one there, it would also be convenient for there to be a case-sensitive one.
So what do you do when it's, I guess,
it's just going to call...
It literally calls spam.sequence equal.
I see.
I think it's fine for completion. Otherwise, complete this.
Yeah,
otherwise, people will be like, "Oh, how do I do that?"
So the ordinal ignore case one is one that's going to be more interesting from networking protocols. Do we like ordinal ignore case as a name? The only reason it's called that is because it matches string comparison ordinal ignore case. We could leave out the word ordinal because ASCII, like, you should assume it's culture invariant.
Yeah.
Even though ASCII has American in the name, I believe.
I mean, probably for call signs, ignore case is slightly nicer than ordinal
ignore case. Or we could call it equals case insensitive, equals ignore case works.
I mean, equals ignore case seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and we would just document this as not culture where it doesn't use culture info anywhere.
Again, like, your argument, I think, holds as ASCII. Like, what do you
So the only... So I kind of like the simplification because ordinal kind of, frankly, doesn't make a lot of sense, but one negative is if I first wrote my code using the ASCII one and then I wanted to move to UTF-8 for some reason, then I have to change my call size.
Yes.
Because
So-
UTF-8 will have ordinal.
But you also have to change
Yeah.
your thinking.
Yeah.
Because now you have to decide, do you want an E with an accent on it to match an E or not? Like you have to make a decision as soon as you move on.
There are culture considerations for UTF-8
Maybe you're right.
that do not exist here.
It basically, if we remove the ordinal from here, it kind of means it doesn't matter, correct?
Yeah.
Once you move to UTF-8,
Then
it does
matters.
matter,
Yeah.
and then you...
And there's no equals ignore case API being proposed for UTF-8. Instead, you pass in a string comparison.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Ideally, I think it would be consistent between the ASCII and UTF-8 versions.
so the reason I didn't do that here is because we would only understand two string comparisons. So why take an enum if only two values are ever correct?
Consistency.
But it's not consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those, similar to how we handle arrays in the VCL. The only consistency is how inconsistent we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Like what I was afraid of is if we take a string comparison, you might be tempted to pass one in, and now it could just fail at runtime. Like, this at least says, hey, we understand only these two concepts and nothing more.
Right.
So the second group of APIs are comparing ASCII data on the left and UTF-8 or UTF-16 data on the right.
Oh shit.
It
Okay.
performs SIMD widening or narrowing as necessary. There is a behavioral difference between here and the first group, and that's called out in the comment. In the first group, if there's any non-ASCII data there, we just do a straight up binary comparison. In the second group, if there's any non-ASCII data, we fail the operation because it's not Latin 1, it's ASCII.
Right.
I failed the operation, meaning you
Return false. Yeah. If this were called Latin 1 equals, then we would widen and do the comparison rather than return
So
false.
we couldn't use this, for example, in HTTP client or something.
If you intend to use Latin 1, then no, you can't use us.
To implement the protocol correctly, you have to use Latin 1.
Why?
Yeah, I agree with you that you shouldn't be doing this when you implement your HTTP server. But if you write a parser, you have to follow the protocol
HTTP headers?
specification. Yeah.
The protocol
That's not what the
doesn't
spec says.
specify encoding.
What?
It does not specify an encoding.
Yeah.
The last time I looked at
The protocol, the HTTP protocol basically says the equivalent of ANSI, which is actually machine dependent. It's not really Latin 1.
I thought it
The original
specifies
spec-
as ISO 89 whatever 01.
Nope.
The original had no encoding. The more modern variants have ASCII explicitly recommended, but also
Yeah.
calling out that may not always get it.
Yeah, it's because the protocol doesn't mandate ISO 8859.1. That's why.
I'm saying I looked into it. It might have changed, and I know what you just said, that in HTTP 2 and
Yeah.
3.
Oh, I
They-
mean,
it-
newer versions of HTTP 1. 2 and 3 are
okay.
ASCII explicitly.
But
So-
I literally looked at it 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and it said ISO 8901.
So Steve, in your
W3 version, it doesn't.
in your Latin
encoding at
1
all.
scenario, Steve,
Doesn't
what are
say
you
ASCII, ANSI, or
what are you
ISO.
comparing on the left and comparing on the right in your Latin 1 scenario?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, we've got strings that represent known header names or values, and those are read-only span of char.
Why would
and
those
read-only
ever? Why would those ever be anything other than ASCII though? For your known header names.
They wouldn't, but the read-only span of byte might contain.
Right, but then you're gonna not match if the header said
That's
content
why I was
language
asking
E
what
with
the
a Q.
behavior. That's why I was asking what fail meant.
Oh,
Yeah, it returns false,
Oh, okay.
which is actually the desired behavior on your part, because you don't want it to match.
I would have been upset if it was throw.
No, it doesn't throw. None of these APIs throw.
I see.
This entire class is a utility class that you would build your own throwing APIs on top of if you cared.
So what does it now mean in terms of ordinal versus non-ordinal?
Ordinal is lowercase a through z and uppercase a through z are treated the same. That's ignore case.
Yeah, we're gonna remove the ordinal part.
Yeah, remove one.
Even from this one, because one
Yeah.
side is non-ASCII?
So both sides are assumed to be ASCII. If we see any non-ASCII data in either one of the two sides, we return false.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Never mind.
Because if we see non-ASCII data on either side, we don't know what the correct interpretation would have been, so we don't know how to do the equality check.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
That is a behavioral difference from the first method cluster. The first cluster just says, if I see non-ASCII data, then at least check to see if the bytes are the same.
Crazy idea. It's often the case that one side of the comparison would be a constant.
Yes.
Some optimization opportunity if we can pre-process and say, I promise this is already lowercase or already uppercase.
I have so many work items out for the JIT team with regard to like special casing constants being passed into these methods and other methods too.
Well, I mean, like the strings themselves would be like the constant value in HTTP client, for instance. We would make it always lowercase and say you don't have to check if this one
It
has
actually
uppercase.
It actually doesn't improve performance all that much, to be honest. Okay, third method cluster, index of, which is really just span.index of, and index of ignore case, which is index of case insensitive.
And how do you implement it? You ToLower first, or you do it on demand?
On demand.
Is it vectorized? Can you vectorize it?
That would not be vectorized for ordinal ignore case. It generally should be okay because what you're searching for should be at near the beginning of the string in the common case, at least in the protocols that I've seen. If it comes down to it, we can vectorize it. It's just there's no immediate mapping of the existing vectorized code back to this. That's the problem.
It's just like if they are, you know, the index of is not really, but I was thinking if they happen to be the same case, then span index of will be faster because it's vectorized.
What do you mean if they happen to be the same case?
So you call the index of or the ignore case, and the spans happen to be all lowercase.
So if they already happen to be the same case, then index of would have matched it eagerly. If they're not the same case, index of will walk the entire search space before saying there's no match.
So you do have an optimization where you first call the, hey, maybe they happen to be the same casing.
No, I'm saying that would be a bad optimization.
Oh, you don't.
Because if in the
search space might be large.
If search space is large and target is small, we could end up optimistically doing an entire O of n sweep over the search space, trashing all of our caches, realizing there's no match, and then backing up.
No, totally understand. But you could do it in chunks.
Yeah, I could do that.
And then you could kind of optimistically first assume that they are the same case, do the chunk. If it doesn't match.
Yeah, we could always improve the performance to whatever we need.
And then all the fun parts of when it needs to span the chunks.
Yeah. There's also, I didn't include last index up here, but it would be there.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I've already brought up the names. Like, what do we think for names here? Are they source and value?
Source and value works for me better than span and value.
Or we could call it.
What is array index of?
UTF-8
What does that use?
Well, none of it's UTF-8.
No, I mean ASCII.
Array and value.
Which one are you calling ASCII text?
Yeah, I like source better than span, honestly, as a first parameter, source or buffer rather than span.
Well, because it's span in the memory extensions index of because it's a.
But they're both
an extension
spans.
method.
But you don't copy source and destination. That seems like there's some transfer going on or some actually writing.
Can it be needle and haystack?
The second one should be something like, text to find.
Yeah. I mean, target and search space are the technically correct terms, but oh god.
You could also just use term for the second one. I mean, the search term is pretty common.
Yeah, because array index of is array and value. Value seems to be the thing that we search for.
Yeah. Value is fine on the right, but on the left is a bit weird.
Maybe just text.
for me.
Text,
Sure.
buffer, source, they all work for me because they all kind of.
You search for the value
They're
of
all
the text.
not the value.
Not the value. Got it. Okay, text and value.
Text and value.
So index of, ignore case, and then last equivalence of the two. That just search from the back forward. And failing is returns a negative number. -1 specifically.
So do we have overloads taking single byte, 2 bytes?
Idle curiosity while typing thing. Is the 7F delete character
It is
ASCII 7 or ASCII 8?
It's ASCII 7.
Okay. Just
You're
as
welcome.
far as your
It's a control character, but it's still ASCII 7.
yeah. Some charge draw a little like this box isn't here.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
it's
wanted to know which way you went.
It's there. Hopefully you're never looking for anything that contains that character.
Or bell or
yeah. I mean, it will work.
Yeah.
The next method group is the same index of, but UTF-8 or ASCII on the left, UTF-16 on the right. This is index of passing a constant term, for instance, on the right. Maybe not quite as useful. I don't know.
Out of curiosity, do we only care on UTF-16 on the right-hand side because that's what we have as literals, or
As opposed to
UTF-8?
If you have UTF-8, you already have a read-only span of byte on the right. So the existing methods work for you.
I see. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Still we add UTF-8 string.
Which is convertible to read-only span of byte.
Well,
Wait, I'm
then
sorry,
you would
Mr.
have
This-
inconsistent behavior, right? Because if you pass in a string, it checks if you're using non-ASCII, whereas if you pass in something that converts to a span of bytes, suddenly it does a byte-wise compare.
That is true, yes.
Yep.
He dashed all my hopes and dreams.
Yes.
It's yeah.
Which I mean, so does that mean that we need to not that ASCII equals needs to not be span sequence? Be rejecting it as not ASCII data.
No, it just means he needs to add an
We will
overload
just add
for
the right
UTF-8
overloads.
string.
Yeah.
And then special case them.
Yeah.
Because the byte one will work, it will just be doing unnecessary work.
Yeah.
Well, but if we add UTF-8 string and UTF-8 string, we make implicitly convertible.
It's
to
not
read-only span
implicitly
of byte.
convertible to read-only span of
Okay.
byte. It's explicitly.
You said implicit.
Oh,
So-
I didn't mean
Or
implicit.
someone said.
Yeah, I didn't mean
As
implicit.
long as it's not implicit, then.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say that we'll end up with a versioning problem. If
Yeah,
UTF-8
you're
string
right.
is zoomed and this is
Yeah.
inbox.
Yes.
So I missed it, Leva, you may have said it, but in these, it explicitly calls out the case where the target has 128 or higher.
Yeah.
What if the search space has 128 or higher?
Then it won't match anyway.
What if, well, it might if they both did, but we're saying that if either of them are 128 or higher,
Then the search fails with -1. Yeah. Because if the search space has 128 or higher and the target doesn't, there's nothing to like index of's never going to. Oh, no, I take that back. This will only return -1. Sorry. If the search space contains non-ASCII data, but the target is found in its entirety before we got to the non-ASCII data in the search space, it's considered success.
Also, you eagerly return false when you encounter.
If the target contains
non-ASCII
non-ASCII
data.
data, we know for a fact the check can never succeed, so you can eagerly return fail. If the search space contains non-ASCII data, there's a chance the target can be found before where that data occurs. And then you could return success. That's why that's called out like that.
I think one of the things things where there's byte on the left and byte on the right.
Yeah.
We allow comparing, like, you know, if we have the number 129 on the left and 129 on the right, that would compare as true. But in the case of byte and char, if I had 129 on the left and 129 on the right, we're saying that's false.
Correct.
Feels a little strange, no?
Not necessarily, because the data that's on the right you generally expect to be a constant, and I don't see how on earth you ever would have given a constant read-only span of byte with a value 129 on the right. I just don't think it's a scenario people will run into in practice.
I'm not sure if it's constant. Like, let's say you're implementing a API to look up headers in a response.
Yeah.
Well, the header that somebody tries to look up is a string that they will pass in. And they will be surprised that the API returns false. I didn't find the header when they actually see the header in the payload. But
what does that mean when they see the header in the payload?
they look at the bytes in the payload. They see a header that has a Latin 1 character.
And they debug it.
They call this API.
Inconveniently, this is not called Latin 1, this is called ASCII.
I know. But I'm saying people can, like somebody doing it may not notice and be surprised. I was thinking like whether we should not, -1 means we didn't find it, -2 means we encountered the Latin, non-ASCII character. It's
changing
weird,
off the normal.
Yeah. I know, you don't like it, and I don't like it either, what I just said. But
I mean, we could
mainly to illustrate the problem.
We could have Latin 1 methods on this. I didn't include them because I didn't think there was a huge scenario for it, but we could have them.
I do kind of have the same that the one can, but arguments are passing through.
Well, the problem is, and I just had to look something up in the chart. Unicode B1 is the +- sign in extended ASCII, so 8-bit ASCII, which might be different than ISO 8859-1. It's one of the border for ASCII versus Windows. So if you have 8-bit ASCII and you're comparing it against non-7-bit characters, the answers don't make any sense. There's code pages, there's
and that's why these. So we could also change the regular equals and equals ordinal ignore case methods, those clusters, to return false if they see any non-ASCII data. We could do that for consistency. It just makes the methods a little bit slower, but whatever.
Right. If you want to say that I promise my data is good, you can just call sequence equals. And if you want case matching, then you have to deal with the fact that we'll say I can't case match 128.
Sure. We could.
I think that's fair.
Would that help the consistency argument then?
Yeah, I mean, I think even Latin 1 versus Windows 1252, people confuse them all the time.
Yeah.
And just asking for weird issues here.
I don't even know the numbers. It's I didn't know I could
Windows
choose them all the
1252, ISO 8859-1, Latin 1. Yeah, it's all great. Yeah. There's actually those ASCII art diagrams that Jeremy was just talking about. They actually do exist in Unicode now. It's just in a completely different.
So it's Unicode art.
Yeah.
All right, so
it's noon. Do we want to just cut it off here then?
Yeah, because there's a lot of more. We probably need another half an hour, would be my guess.
Yeah.
And I am hungry.
And
so
I can make those changes back to this real fast.
So I will paste in the notes we have. I will just bump it back to API needs work.
We decide to
drop ordinal, make equals and equals ignore case and similar methods fail. False if they see any non-ASCII data anywhere.
Yep.
Rename search space to text and target to value, and that's all we got to so far.
And add last one.
Okay.
Yeah. It's called out there in the comments, but yeah, I can explicitly add it.
It's and you don't want to throw if it's not if we
encounter these APIs never throw. None of them.
Well, I know you said that, but you don't want them to throw.
Right.
Steve doesn't want them to
throw. These APIs are expecting you to pass arbitrary.
Thanks, guys, online.
To them, we don't want them to.
Bye bye.